What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking E Forge, and today I'm going to be forging a deer's head. So, let's get rocking. Alright, so I'm starting out with about 2.5 to 3 foot long piece of 3/8 inch square stock, and that's because I'm going to be making this into a fire poker later on, but you can start with thicker square stock if you want to forge a larger, more detailed head. And the first thing I'm going to do here is come in with my rounding hammer and just start flattening the first about 1 to 1.5 inches of that bar to about between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch thick, and allowing that to taper up to the parent stock. What I'm going for here is it to kind of taper down to the end from the parent stock, and then in the other plane, spread out and flare out, which is why I'm using the rounding hammer. We'll get to why in just a second. Once you've got this kind of paddle shape forged out, I'm going to quench this, and then I'm going to head to the bandsaw, and we'll start making some cuts in preparation for the ears and the antlers of the deer's head. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a cut for where the ears are going to be, and I'm going to cut in from the end about 1/8 of an inch from each side. I'm going to eyeball it right where the steel itself starts to kind of thicken, and we're going to stop there about 3/4 of an inch from the tip. And then I'm going to go back to the forge and heat this up, lock it in the vise, and spread these ears out. All right, I'm just going to grab these with my tongs and kind of pull them out a little bit. And then chisel down and just kind of spread those out. And before we go any further, I'm just going to go hammer out the ears to be as close to like 90 degrees out as possible. And I'm using my fuller to just make sure that I can get in there at the corner. Before we go any farther, I'm just going to clean up this cut, kind of round the inside of the cut out instead of having it sharp from the cut of the bandsaw, to avoid stress concentrators that could result in a crack, because this is a pretty thin piece of material right here, and I don't want to crack either of the ears off because of that stress concentrator. And after flattening out and quenching this, I'm just going to bring it back to the bandsaw and cut in down the center of the horns, and then we'll cut in at an angle to establish what will become the tines of the horns themselves. All right, so now we're going to prep for the forge weld. And to do that, I'm going to lay the face, what's going to become the face of the deer, over the horn or over the anvil. Forge that 90 degrees. And then just forge this over. I'm going to lay this down face first on the anvil. And forge the rest of this down. And to support the forge weld, before I fully close this up, and this is a little wide, but before I fully close this up, I'm going to put some flux in here. And then we're going to heat this up, close that up, and then forge weld this little area right here where the face turns into the ears and the horns. Just going to do one little bit more flux here. Probably too much flux, but we're going to close that up. Now that that's closed up, we're going to get this to forge welding temperature and weld this all together. All right, so I am getting this piece at the site of the weld up to a lemon yellow color, and it should glow pretty much the same color as the inside of the forge. And then once I've got it to that lemon yellow glowing color, I'm gonna pull it out and bring it to the anvil and use very light blows to try to set that forge weld and go right back into the forge pretty quickly thereafter, just to get it right back to that lemon yellow color, bring it right back out, and then make sure that forge weld is set before I actually go to start shaping the head of the deer. Once I've got this forge weld set, I'm just gonna start forging the face of the deer. And I'm really just gonna forge a one-sided taper here. Because deer's heads are just kind of triangular with a little bit of a forehead on top. No, that didn't forge weld at all. That's okay. All right, so I reset the weld because it didn't weld originally. I must not have gotten hot enough, but now I'm cleaning off all the scale. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and bend this ear back out and start working on that before we start working on the antlers. And in order to forge these ears out, I'm gonna lay these off the edge of the anvil. And just spread those out with the rounding side of my rounding hammer. And the thinner you get, the wider they get, but you also run the risk of thinning down the point where they actually come into the head, which could result in a crack, so don't thin these down too awful much. And then I'm gonna come in here and clamp the head in the vise. Kind of bend the main parent stock away, and then I'm gonna chisel down underneath the horns to bend those out. And I'll split these two apart as well. All right, before I go any farther, I'm gonna come in and chisel away some of the leftover scale from the flux from the forge weld, and then I'll need to split the tines out a little bit and start kind of shaping these using my files to thin down the main portion of the antlers and then shape the tines into the appropriate shape. Now that I'm satisfied with where I've got the horns at, I'm just gonna soften, flatten this back out. Then I'm gonna come in and soften the corners of the head to give the deer head a little more natural look. And then I'll come in and start working on the actual face of the deer itself. All right, so what I'm gonna start with is the nose. I'm gonna tightly clamp that in the vise. And then I'm just going to come in at the corners with my center punch, if I can get it to stay put. Punch in 2 nostrils. Then I'm gonna come in with my chisel, punch across for the mouth. Looks kind of ridiculous, but deer have this also interesting feature. See if I can figure out how to get it in here. That connects their nostrils. See, is it on the outside or the inside? I'm like actively using a picture of a deer, kind of the outside. I'm gonna come in with my smaller chisel here to make it easier to line this up. And they've got kind of a line between their mouth and their nostril. Got a little bit of an interesting nose there. And we'll move on to the eyes, and then we'll do the final shape on the antlers, and we'll be finished with the deer head. All right, so we're gonna come in for the eyes next, and the anvil's gonna give us a nice support. And I gotta be sure to come in from the sides-ish. Okay, come in down on an angle. There we go. And then make sure to shift the eyeball kind of into the side, because deer are in fact not predators. They do not have forward-facing eyes. So this is going to end up looking a little bit skull-like. All right, so now that the eyes are punched in and leave you feeling haunted, we're gonna finish up the horns and we'll be all done with the deer head. All right, so now the ears are way too long, so I'm just gonna go grind off the ends of those, shape those to a nice round, and we will be finished with our deer head. Alrighty, and that is going to do it for this project. Now, it turned out a little crusty, a little quirky. The eyes are, you know, just hollow. The horns could have ended up a little bit better shaped, I think. But I think it turned out pretty well, all things considered, and it's a little different than the classic ram that you see fairly frequently on YouTube. So, if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, or ring that notification bell. If you want to support me in the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video, or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.